welcome to my channel. This is your Not Your Daddy's Metal podcast, and my name is Irenee Moon, and I welcome you here for another week. So last week I did my intro video, which I'm very excited to be starting my channel. And so we're here, we're started, and we're in our first ever podcast. And this week is really special to me. I was really nervous. I was putting this one off in the recording and the research on it because it is my absolutely favorite artist / band that I'm going to be addressing today, and kind of done the research for you so we can get into it. And I'm so excited, but yeah, like I said, I was really nervous about getting into this. So I hope I do it justice. I really, really do. Because otherwise then I feel like I've just done the metal community an injustice, and that's really hard on me. But now I am trying a new atmosphere. I am here in my husband's office seat. I'm kind of behind over here. My desk is back over that way, but now I'm trying it in this platform. My husband has a better camera and a mic, and I didn't. So we're going to try this out. If you guys like this and like this setup, tell me and let me know in the comments. I also want to hear from you guys some more. I've had a few friends come on here, and I'm really excited about that. And I've also had a couple people reach out to me that they want to talk in my podcast. So I'm super excited about that. If you think you want to talk for a couple minutes about something with me on here, gladly shoot me a DM. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to discuss all things metal. So actually, one of the things that I'm going to implement into my podcast is metal news. And so I'm going to kind of do two different metal kind of recent events or something that's new in the community, and I want to just be able to address those things. So first off, I don't think it's news at this point. It's pretty common knowledge, I think, in the metal community about the whole Marilyn Manson scandal. But I do want to address it. That's kind of something that it saddened me when I heard about it. And so if you don't already know about it, which, there's a few people that didn't. My husband didn't know what was going on, so I informed him, and he was like, oh my gosh, so there are probably a few of you out there who don't know what's going on. But Marilyn Manson is facing sexual abuse and grooming allegations. There was a couple women who came forward and said, yeah, he's been grooming me, or he had groomed me in the past, and he'd also done some very sexual things that I wasn't really on board with. And so with that being said, it is allegations at this point. We don't know, but coming out of a movement of the Me Too movement, there's a lot of controversies that surround that, and a lot of people that are going to try to deflect and say, oh, they don't know. They're just trying to be a part of this thing. And I want to be able to establish here on my podcast, as well as within the community of just individuals, and to tell you guys that these are hard for people to come forward and say these things, because there have been people that mess it up in the past about saying, oh, they're trying to just get a rise out of people. They're trying to get their 5 minutes of fame, But we also do have to take these allegations as serious and do our proper investigation. Because these women can actually be talking about something that is really true and real for them, and we're not taking them seriously. So why would somebody else not want to as well? But from this, and especially this specific allegation, supposedly people who worked with Marilyn Manson onto his tours and were some of his producer friends, I guess, were saying that yes, he was doing some of these things. And so it's kind of scary to see some of these things, because some of the guys that we idolize, like Marilyn Manson, when we were growing up, we listened to his stuff, we were like, oh my gosh, he wouldn't be one of those. So it looks really bad on the metal community, and it impacts us. And so we have to take these allegations seriously and investigate them. And I hope and pray that it actually doesn't come out as true. But at the same time, if it does, we got to deal with that too. We got to be able to say that what these guys are doing in the community and some of these artists, that's not acceptable. So for that being said, I'm also not gonna, in the future here, gonna be talking about Marilyn Manson. I'm not gonna do a specific, part of an episode about him, his music, whatever. He might pop up in styles and in genres, but I'm not gonna specifically start talking about his stuff. Just for future reference. I might change that, but from where it stands, I don't really necessarily want to stand by a sexual abuser. That's just disgusting to me, so I'm not going to do that. And then in other news, we have Behemoth's Nergal. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's their front man. He's also now facing another blasphemy charge in their home country, Poland. So for those who don't know, Poland has like a law, blasphemy law, that it's supposed to protect religious freedoms, but what it's doing is it's causing artists like Behemoth and like the bands themselves to not be able to express their music in the way they like. So for instance, now they're having a charge that entails that it's offending somebody's religious feelings. So we can just, everybody, you know, who's like a big metal fan is just like eye roll, like what the hell. But for the actual practicality of it, I think it shows the exact religious I don't want to say bigotry, but it is bigotry because it's like Behemoth themselves have their own specific beliefs, whether it's religious or not, but they're trying to show their own opinions through their music, and they're being bigoted against their own country and the people in their own communities. So I guess it shows to us that free speech is still a heavily debated thing. But I thought that was really interesting to bring forth. But yeah, those are the news items for this week. And now we're going to get into it. My absolute favorite artist of all time. If you haven't already guessed it, I'm wearing his band t-shirt. We saw him in our hometown here. He was alongside as a header with a couple of, we actually went to go see, now I can't even remember. We went to go see a band. This was, oh, my memory. But we went to go see a band, and he was one of like the openers for them. They had quite a few openers actually. And he was on a solo tour with them. And this was before Empath. And if you don't know who I'm talking about already, I'm going to be giving it away here shortly. But he was on tour with them. This was before his new solo tour after that was canceled because of COVID. But if you haven't already guessed it, it is Devin Townsend. He is my absolute favorite artist in the metal community. I have other favorite artists in different, differing genres, but Devin Townsend, oh my gosh. If you haven't heard him, and much of his music before that, because I'm going to get into it a little bit further, he is a man of many talents and a man of many bands. He's been in a lot of different groups, and so that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to kind of give you an overview of his stuff, and let's get right to it. So he's a Canadian, like myself. He's from British Columbia, and he grew up playing music. He had started, I think, and I believe that he had started playing a bit of the banjo, the guitar, a little bit of the piano. He had to prove to his parents that he could play guitar. But one of the first songs that, and I found this on Wikipedia, an interview that I watched, that one of the first songs that he had learned was Folsom Prison by Johnny Cash, which is a good song. So, which is kind of funny, but yeah, so he's been in the music community, or just he's been playing music since he was younger. Like all of them probably have been, because they're such superb artists. He's a professional. So like he started young, he got into it, which is really exciting for us because he's honed his work for years. But I'm going to list you guys some of the bands that he's been a part of, because then that shows exactly kind of the breadth of his work and his talents. So he started off playing in a band, Wild Hearts, in 1994, and he'd only been with them for a year. I don't know a lot about Wild Hearts. I'm trying to kind of branch out a little bit in that, but I haven't listened to that album that he's been with on that, or even that band. I don't know much about him. But he was also, that same year is when he started Strapping Young Lad. So Strapping Young Lad, that project for him went from 1994 to 2007. So we would class Strapping Young Lad as extreme, heavy, and thrashing metal. And I'm going to say flat out, I'm going to be talking a bit more about Strapping Young Lad in the future, or like in just in a few minutes. So I'm not going to say much here. But that was another band that he was a part of. Then he was a part of Frontline Assembly and that was from 1994 to 1995. And I don't know a lot about them either. But now you're starting to see that there's a bit of overlapping. So those three bands, during those times, he had his feet in like a few different things, which is, you're going to notice about him that even now has his foot in a bunch of different things. He's trying to find where his niche falls under. And it's just interesting because he starts off in very interesting realms. He starts off with heavy extreme metal, and then now we see progressive, almost transcendence and like, yeah, very progressive stuff. But you see a gradual transcendence into a world that he still doesn't know if he's a part of. So, but one thing I will note, and all people talk about this when we talk about Devin, is that he's not a part of just one specific genre. He always bridges so many other little gaps, and so we don't necessarily know where to put him, because I can't necessarily just put him in progressive, but then there's some songs that absolutely wreck the industry for extreme and thrash metal. So it's like, our hands are up. We don't know at this point. And he doesn't know. And in interviews that you'll watch, he'll be like, I don't know who I am. I don't know my personality. I don't know what I want for my music. But in the process of him finding something, he knows exactly what makes good music. And that's what I like about him, is that he's influenced by some really good artists. But I'm going on a tangent. So then after the Frontline Assembly, as well as Strapping Young Lad, he went into the Devin Townsend Band. So that is also as a distinct cutoff, because he's with that from 2003 to 2007. And then he took a short break. So what he was doing in that period also is pretty similar to just the Devin Townsend project. So when you're Googling, or like you're looking on Apple Music or whatever streaming platform you use, when you type in Devin Townsend project, you're just going to get stuff from Devin Townsend Band, or the Devin Townsend Band. So, but that Devin Townsend Band went from 2003 to 2007, and then Devin Townsend project went from 2008 to 2018. So Devin Townsend project is progressive, heavy metal. It's also debatable where else to put them, like I was saying. And then after, or during and amongst that, actually no, after that, we have Bent C, which is a collective union that he has with some other artists. I don't know much about them. I haven't heard them. But that was from 2011 to 2012. Now we get kind of this random little insert. We have the Causalities of Cool, which is also a country mix that he has with another artist. I tried listening to that album that he had created here, but like I've said in my opening video, I hate country. So I stopped there. But as you can see, he has had an interesting load of like just all sorts of stuff. And then after all of that, he's just writing solo now. So we have just Devin Townsend. And then he put out an album, just Empath, recently, actually in 2019. And that was where I was going to be going to a concert in the United States, close to where my family is. And then COVID hit, and I was so upset because I was so excited to see him again, but COVID just does a lot of different things. Also, now we're going to get into kind of the logistics of what we see from Devin Townsend as a whole, just as an individual. Some of the interviews that he's done, he links his inspiration to a lot of like two very distinct bands, and I will be talking about them in the future. He's really good friends with members of Mesuggah as well as Gojira, two awesome bands. Like, guys, if you haven't already looked them up as well, you should check them out. It's Mesuggah and Gojira, and those two bands are progressive metal. Mesuggah, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's jant metal, like Djant. And Gojira is also like extreme death progressive. And they're both really good bands. But those two bands influenced a lot of what Devin Townsend's work is now, as well as what it was when he was in the early 2000s with like the Devin Townsend project, as well as not so much, like I think a little bit with strapping young lad. There might have been a bit of that extreme that was really coming evoked with when you listen to Mesuggah. You can get a bit of that. But when you look at the Strapping Young Lad band that he had created, and that he had been a part of, there is an album in that I will talk a little bit about more. It's called Alien, and that was the first album that I was introduced when I started listening to Strapping Young Lad. And that band, and that specific album really targets what Devin was going through, and which is interesting because, you know, when you look at bands, you kind of put them up on like a pedestal that they're like another world or another person, but you hear a lot of his voice through all of this because you see Devin's story here. He dealt with bipolar disorder as well as alcoholism, and he came off of both. Like, he was coming off of his bipolar medication as well as he stopped drinking, and he was struggling with a little bit of alcoholism at the time. And then we get what we see now as Alien. It is a very aggressive, it is a very like in your face thrashing extreme album that, I mean, if you haven't heard it, that's an album that I want you to start with. Like, there's 2 songs on there that are my absolute favorites. One is Love, ? And then the other one is Shitstorm. 2 of, like, if you want to rage in your car and you're mad about the day at work, just put those 2 on and you'll be good. But those 2 are very chaotic and extreme is what when you like address that album as a whole, those two words, just chaotic and extreme, angry, that's what we hear when we talk about that. So that's kind of the influences that we're coming off of, what we start with and what we see. You know, those are 2 very broad spectrums, and you can see the growth that he's had. He comes from Strapping then to his solo albums, and like his solo album now, I would almost consider a bit of like a Dream Theater-esque vibe where you get a lot of different stuff all over the place, like all these electronical sounds with like his very distinct voice. Like, he's a very amazing artist and a very amazing singer. And I'm going to talk a bit about his vocals here in a few minutes, but yeah, so his notable albums to me, we're going to dive into the bit of the collection. I'm not going to talk about every album he's ever done. There might be a few that I'll talk about, but specifically I'm going into the Devin Townsend project and then Strapping. So those 2 are what I'm going to go with in detail. And if you see me looking forward, not up here, I'm looking at my notes because there's a lot. It's hard to remember everything because he's also one of those bands and one of those artists that just puts out so much. But you don't get the feedback of like somebody who's just almost like shit posting you, but it's actually just he's giving you a lot of stuff, which is like, we're like, more, please, and it's good for us. But he's not dwindling in the quality, is what I'll say. As much as he's put out a lot, he is an artist by trade and he's good at what he does. So you're not going to be disappointed in the realm of extreme metal and progressive metal when you come to Devin. So now to get back to his albums, my all-time favorite album that I'm going to start with is also, it's called Transcendence. That was done in 2016. Every song on that album is an absolute banger. Like, there's not a lot of albums out there in this entire world that I can say I'm like, dang, like I can sing every one. And this album is specifically one of them. And when I die and when I am lowered into the ground, I want the song From the Heart to be played. Like, I've just flat out put that in my like will. So you can just imagine what that is, because it brings forth a very setting tone of like the title itself, Transcendence. It's not just your basic metal it's not your basic thrash metal as well as extreme metal. It's the progressive tone that we start seeing when we discuss Devin, like, and when we discuss the Devin Townsend project as a whole. So this album is just awesome. I highly suggest you look at it. Stormbending is also a really good song on this album. Friggin' phenomenal. But then we have another album that he has. It's called Z2, and that's in 2014. Ziltoid. That's all I'm going to say. Is look up Ziltoid, and then you get album Z2. He is known for having a very comedic platform as a metal artist. He uses this concept and almost this caricature of Ziltoid and coffee, which is two funny things when you talk about in metal. But he's now transcended this humor level in his work that, you know, you when you think of metal, you think of anger, you think of like digression and just depression. That's definitely like a death metal and like all that kind of stuff. But like when you hear metal, you don't think of stuff that bridges the gap of humor. And so he does that in this album. It's a good album. I like it. And it's very just, it's quirky. So, and I think that's what I like about Devin, is that he's quirky. He's just funny. So that's that album. Then we have Epicloud. And this was the album that I was introduced to. It was put out in 2012. It's a very powerful album. Like, not when I'm saying like, oh, it's just like, it's very aggressive. It's powerful. Like, if you've heard his voice, which is a very distinguishing factor of Devin, is that his voice is so projective. Like, I think of Devin as though I think of like a big, huge orchestra and like a guy singing like opera in metal. Like, he's so good at projecting his voice that this is what I think of when I hear Epicloud. Most of his albums do project his voice, which is like, we can hear it, but this album almost transcends that and shows his voice on a whole new level. Like, it shows his voice at such ranges that like, the genuine power of it and the genuine power of the song Kingdom in this album, like, phenomenal. Like, I highly recommend watching videos about people who like are just, you know, like not even critiquing, just like reacting to his songs. So many people, like there's like artists, or like not artists, but like teaching coaches who watch his art, like his stuff on stage, and they're like, what? So I highly suggest you just type in like Devin Townsend react videos. You will, it's awesome. Then we have Destruction. That album was put out in 2012. Every band, every one of your favorite artists is going to have an album that you're like, I don't know. Destruction for me is one of those. It's not the worst band. It's not the worst album I've ever heard, but it's not my favorite. Juular, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Juular. And Planet of the Apes are probably the best songs in that album. We get a bit more of that grunge thrash metal in that specific album, but not my favorite. It might be yours. You could check it out. Then another album that he put out that is just like a hack right in the middle of this band, and just exactly shows what I'm talking about when I say Devin Townsend is a man of his own. We have the album Ghost, which is also put out that same year in 2011. This album is just so interesting because my Apple Music considers this album spiritual or inspirational music. If you listen to it, you could just listen to it in your house. Like, it's a nice jiving beat, but it's also very like mystical, and like there's acoustic guitars. Like, it's not your typical metal anymore. It's a progressive sound, and it falls into that progressive community. So that's why we see Devin kind of flirting with everything else. But yeah, it's a good album to listen to. It's a nice refreshing sound and showing us exactly the talents that this whole band has. And then we have Addicted in 2009. This is a really good album. Like, there's not like the whole it's not like Transcendence, where for me the whole entire album is like just a phenomenal piece, but Addicted also has a lot of his really good songs that he does in a lot of solo cuts and in his on his solo tours, like in acoustic settings. So I just suggest that you check out those ones, and highly check out Addicted as well. It's such a good album. Then there's an album, so when they were in just the Devin Townsend band, there is an album that they had live from the Royal Albert Theatre. So probably my absolute favorite song of theirs, just in general, is Deadhead. Look that song up on YouTube. Look it up on your app, like any streaming platform. That song, I can't even begin to tell you. I cried in it. I absolutely thrashed my head to it. I get chills still. I think I'm putting it up on this like pedestal, but it is an absolutely phenomenal song. Like, he's like chilling back playing, and then he's like, yo, pick a tempo to his drummer, and then like drinking water, and it sounds amazing. Like, I highly I can't recommend it enough. But it sucks because I'm not a big live feed fan. Like, I don't like listening to live music unless I'm in person. Like, I don't like going to Apple Music and being like, check out live. Like, to me, that's like, okay, cool. It's great that you can still get the amazing acoustics from that, but you still get those like people in the background doing clapping, and it's like, way to make me feel like I'm not there, like that I'm a piece of junk and I can't be there. But I've only been able to find it on a live track, but amazing song, like flat out my favorite song of theirs, top tier, showcases exactly what Devin Townsend Project and Devin Townsend Band is, and just him as a person. It's so beautiful. So now, I'm gonna get into strapping. I don't know. I was obviously like Strapping Young Lads started. Their first album is in 1994 or 1995. I was 1. I didn't know Strapping, of course. I just get the like behind the scenes. Like, now I just listen to back old bands, you know. So the real only the 2 albums that I love the most are obviously Heavy as a Really Heavy Thing. That one's their first one. Really good band. Really good album. Absolute extreme. Shows you the pure magnitude of the aggression that he was facing. And then you get Alien, which was 2005. Absolute bomb as hell album. Like, check it out. I talked about that earlier. This album is chaotic. And if you like chaos when you come to metal, and you like feeling that way, and you are in that, and you need to just absolutely scream sometimes with a pillow to your face, this is the band for you. And like, this is the album for you as well. Like, oh. So those are the 2 that I know of really well. The other albums, I don't know as much. It's very similar to that style. Like, he fell into a style of extreme metal here. Extreme, heavy, really raw, thrashing, a bit of progressive at this point. But he was falling into that mold where I knew we obviously see that he didn't want to be there. And he expressed that. He said he got sick and he got bored of it. And when we see bands like Mesuggah, every album just becomes more of their style. Like, they're not falling off the train. Whereas for him, he was saying, like, I couldn't exactly find what I wanted. So we see a bit of this. It's the same style. We don't get a lot of expansion, but out of this we have the albums City in 2007, The New Black 2006, and then SYL, which will be Strapping Young Lad, in 2003, and then those 2 other ones that I was talking about. So these years are very raw, very super heavy, your stereotypical metal that everyone thinks about, every dad thinks about, you know. But, and also within that same frame, this was the Skullet days. So literally look at pictures of him in Strapping Young Lad. He has a skullet. It's friggin' phenomenal. It's just, I've never seen somebody truly do a skullet. It looks badass. And on stage, when you're literally hammering out chords, it looks cool. So, but yeah. So then I'm going to talk a bit about his solo album, Empath. That was 2019. I brought that up earlier. I wanted to go to that tour and listen to his stuff, but COVID. It's an interesting album, okay? And this is where we see a bit of the Devin that everybody's like, what do we do with him? He's a bit of Dream Theater in a way, and I said that earlier. I get a bit of Octavarium vibes from the Astonishing album. I don't want to say this to offend people who like Dream Theater, but I'm not a big Dream Theater buff. I don't mess with that stuff because it's too technical and electronic. But we still get the progressive tone. And we get that style where he likes to experiment. And we can see that as him as an artist, is that now with that form and that new wave of like progressive that we're getting, he loves to just be able to throw things at us to just for purely like entertainment purposes. because as like someone who's recording that, it's like so much chaos and so much like, oh my gosh, which can make sense to him as an artist, because you get the chaoticness of Alien to then now the chaos of his Empath album. It's not chaos, but it's still chaos to the ears. Like it's a lot, but it brings it together in such a melodious way. And so that's what I love so much about his work, is that it fits and it molds well, but it experiments with so many different platforms. Need a drink break. But just for closing here, and just to kind of finish off what I'm really wanting to say about him, is that he is not a boring artist. What I like about metal, and what brings me back to the, you know, the other artists outside of the whole like poppy metal, is that we get so much creativity. We get something new. We don't get the same stuff. Like when you listen to like Lanny or like bands like that today, and like, you know, our pop culture, our new main stage stuff, you don't get, like, you get the same thing over and over again. You're still gonna hear that same backbeat. Whereas with these guys, like, they're messing with the drums, they're messing with all that stuff, and they're showing us new ways to experiment with metal. It's not your stereotypical extreme metal that we started with. You know, like, you get bands like Cannibal Corpse and stuff like that were like messing with new things, and even like Death and like all these other bands. It's breaking the mold, it's breaking the genre, and it's bridging those gaps, and that's why we like discussing it, and that's why we are where we are, is that bridging that gap, breaking that mold, making that style move, we're able to come back for more. And he's one of those bands, if I never got to listen to any other band in the world, it would be Devin Townsend. I could listen to it for hours, because there's so much new stuff, and I feel like he's going to keep creating till the day he dies, because he still wants to figure out what his taste is, what his genre is, and he's not been able to find that, and that's for the creativity, or that's for the enjoyment of us. I mean, I want him to keep going and keep trying to find himself, because that's just so awesome. But I hope I did him justice. I mean, I hope you guys are going to be able to, I hope you guys find it interesting to check him out. That's always my goal, is for you guys to be like, hey, I want to actually listen to this song that she's talking about. Like, it sounds cool. I'm going to hone in on how I do these things, how I talk about albums, how I talk about artists and their styles. But the thing is, I don't want it to go as long as what it can be. Like, I'm bridging on the gap of 40 minutes already, and I don't really want to be here just blabbering on, and you guys are like, okay, like, but I just want to be able to find a good niche to fall under. And if you guys like me talking about songs, albums, when they were put out, like, ask me more things. Like, if you want to see something, if you want to hear if you want me to talk purely on style, like, I would love to do that. I can definitely do that. Whichever you guys want to hear, I will do that, because, I mean, I could talk for hours. I love talking about this kind of stuff, as you can see. But, so next week, I am going to be on here again. Every Tuesday, I'm going to be putting out a podcast, unless noted otherwise. I have a life outside of this. I'm in school. I live very off the cuff. I am very ADHD, so I have a lot of stuff going on in the background, but I want to be able to keep something consistent in my life, something that I can look forward to. So it's going to be every Tuesday for what I know of, unless noted otherwise. I'm also going to start up a series of like metal as a whole. I need to give myself prep. That's going to be a lofty goal, but metal it's not going to just be one straight podcast. I'm actually going to have to do it into a series. I'm going to be going down to genre to genre to genre and talk about the bands in those genres. It's going to be hard, but also at the same time, it's something that I really want to put out there, because that's where you learn the best. That's where you hear some of these bands, because if you're like, this is the kind of style I like, this is the kind of concepts that I like, here's the bands, go check them out. When I hear someone being like, hey, have you heard the band this? Immediately I'm like, okay, let's look. Like, that's how I am. So that's what I want to put to the field. So in 2 weeks, I'm going to start up a series of genres and subgenres. That'll be fun. And I'm really excited about that because also for me, it'll be cool because I'll be like, oh, I'm going to go check these guys out. And then after that, I actually had a few people reach out to me and say, hey, I would love to be on your podcast to talk about some stuff. I love talking about metal, but at the same time, for me sitting here for however long I'm going to do this, it does get a little boring, and so I want to switch it up. So if you think that you've got some new concepts on metal, I would love to discuss it with you. I'd love to debate you. If you're like, Devin Townsend sucks, I'll be like, okay, we're hands up. But yeah, if you want to debate me, if you want to discuss something, if you want to bring something new to the table, if you're a band that's just starting and you're like, hey, I'm in small town, blah, 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 come check me out. We're on this. I would love to promote you. It would just be fun. We need to start up a community in small town Saskatchewan, small town Canada. We need to do that. So DMs are always open. Come, just hit me up. I'd love to start that. But yeah,